Hi, my name's Maribel. This past Thanksgiving, my sister stood at the table and joked, "Kids shouldn't take up space." Everyone laughed, except me. I paid for that dinner. I helped raise her daughter. I even signed the house over in her name to keep things simple. But somehow, I was still the one sitting in a chair without a name. They said it was just a joke. But how many jokes does it take before you realize maybe you were never really part of the family to begin with? And when I finally walked away, was that the betrayal? Or was it the first honest thing I'd done in years? The wind bit sharper than I expected for late November. I parked 2 blocks from the clubhouse. Delphine had forgotten to send me the guest parking instructions again. I didn't bother texting her. I'd learned by now. It wasn't that she forgot. It's that she didn't think I needed to know. I walked slowly, letting the weight of the wine bottle in my tote shift with each step. Outside, the sun hadn't fully disappeared, but the trees were already bare. Gold and rust-colored leaves crunched underfoot as I reached the tall glass doors. A staff member opened one before I touched the handle. "Welcome to the liqueur Thanksgiving," he smiled. I nodded. "Thanks." He didn't ask my name, didn't need to. I was invisible the moment I arrived. Inside, the room was warm, almost too warm. A long oak table ran through the center, set for 22 people. Candles flickered between pine cones and tiny white pumpkins. Each seat had a folded napkin, a gold-edged place card written in elegant cursive. I walked slowly around the table, looking for my name. Everyone was there. Ruth Ann, my mother. Lyra, Delphine's daughter. Even Chase, her boyfriend, got a seat with his name etched in metallic ink. Mine wasn't there. I paused, blinking harder than necessary. Maybe I missed it. I circled back. Nothing. I pulled out my phone and reread Delphine's last message. "Just bring wine or something simple. No need to worry, Em." Right, no need to worry. Just fund the entire thing and show up like a guest. Last month, when she said money was tight, again, I quietly covered the deposit, then the catering, then decorations. She promised she'd reimburse me once her fellowship stipend cleared. It never did. And I never asked. I placed the wine down near the bar. No one greeted me. No one looked up. I smoothed my jacket and moved toward the back corner where the extra chairs stood. I grabbed one and slid it near the edge of the table. No name card, no problem. I'd grown used to not having a seat. In the kitchen, I could hear her laughing. Delphine's signature laugh, sharp and knowing. She was talking about her latest paper on emotional labor. The irony nearly made me snort. While she sipped spiced cider and discussed theories, I was folding napkins in the back like some background volunteer. I adjusted one that had gone lopsided. This wasn't new. Last year, I cooked a side dish for the Thanksgiving potluck. Delphine didn't put it out, said there were too many carbs already. The year before that, I brought candles. She returned them, unopened. "Too strong a scent," she'd said, though I'd bought them based on what she once told me she loved. I used to think if I kept showing up, if I kept doing the right thing, one day she'd see me. Really see me. Not as the little sister who dropped out of grad school. Not as the single one. Not as the fallback plan. But as someone who held the damn thing together. Maybe this year, I thought. Maybe this year she'll say, "Thank you." Delphine's voice snapped me back. "Where's the wine?" she called from the dining room. "I put it near the bar," I said, stepping into view. She didn't turn to look. "Okay, cool," she replied, and returned to her conversation. I nodded to no one in particular and sat down in the corner chair. A few minutes passed before guests started to arrive. Ruth Ann entered first, air-kissing everyone within reach. She wore the same sage-green scarf she always did for holidays. Family lore claimed it was Dad's favorite. I doubted he ever noticed it. "Oh, you made it," she said when she saw me. "I wasn't sure if you'd come this year," I smiled. "It's Thanksgiving." She gave a small shrug and walked off to help Lyra adjust her dress. I stayed seated. Around me, chatter filled the room. Someone mentioned a recent trip to Colorado. Another complained about airport lines. Delphine held court at the center of the table, nodding thoughtfully, laughing strategically. Chase hovered behind her like a backup act. I poured myself a glass of sparkling cider and walked toward the fireplace. A decorative frame rested on the mantel. Inside, a piece of beige cardstock read in scripted letters, "Thankful for the hearts that make this home." I looked at the names on the table, the seats around me, the conversations I wasn't in, and I wondered, for the first time that evening, if they ever considered mine one of those hearts. I took a breath and turned back toward the table. Delphine stood, glass in hand. Her eyes scanned the room. She tapped the edge of her glass with a fork. The sound rang sharp, slicing through the chatter. "Let's take a moment," she said, smiling wide, "to thank those who've made this all possible." I didn't move, just listened. She went on like I wasn't even there. Her voice filled the room, measured, confident, rehearsed. "I'm so grateful for my mother, Ruth Ann, who taught me the value of showing up with grace. To Lyra, for being the light of my life. And to our beautiful circle of support, family, friends, and everyone who helped bring this evening together." That was it. That was everyone, and it wasn't me. A few claps, a couple of hears, the usual chorus of social compliance. I folded my napkin tighter in my lap, pressing the corners into my palm like it was the only thing anchoring me to my seat. I didn't say a word. I just looked down, then at my plate, then at the people around the table who didn't seem to notice anything wrong. Or maybe they did, and chose not to. Dessert plates were being cleared. People stood, stretched, poured coffee. I stayed seated, letting the hum of conversation blur into a kind of background static. That's when my cousin Julian walked over, holding something between two fingers. "Hey, Maribel," he said, chuckling. "Didn't know you still went by Valdez. Thought you ditched that guy a decade ago." I looked at the place card he was holding. My name, printed in a cheap serif font, still carrying my ex-husband's last name, the one I legally dropped 6 years ago. Before I could respond, Delphine walked by and caught a glimpse of the card. "Oh, that? I just copied everyone's info from an old file," she said, laughing lightly. "Didn't think it mattered." "Didn't think it mattered." I forced a small smile. "It usually doesn't," I said, "until it does." Julian raised an eyebrow, but I stood and walked away before he had the chance to turn it into a question. I found myself in the kitchen without thinking, hands in the sink, water running. I grabbed a dish and started rinsing it, more for something to do than because anyone asked. No one had. No one ever did. Delphine's voice drifted in from the other room. "Maribel's always been sweet, just not great with emotional nuance, you know?" Someone laughed. "Maybe Chase, maybe one of her grad school friends. I didn't care enough to check." I stopped rinsing. My hands stayed under the water, heat building up across my palms. Not from the faucet, from something else. Something older. Older than tonight. Older than last Thanksgiving. A slow-burning anger that had nowhere left to hide. This wasn't about a card. It wasn't about a name. It was about the fact that she erased me in public the same way she erased me in private. Smoothly, politely, with a smile on her face, and a story everyone else preferred. I thought of all the things I'd done in silence. Driving through that blizzard so Lyra wouldn't miss her interview. Covering the property taxes when Ruth Ann was about to lose her home. Staying late at work so I could afford to make someone else's dreams easier. And they'd boiled me down to sweet, not generous, not reliable, not essential. Just sweet. I shut off the water and dried my hands, slow and deliberate. Then I stepped out the side door onto the small patio, letting the night air cool my skin. No one followed. No one called after me. I checked my phone. Nothing. Not even a "Where are you?" from Lyra. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then put it back in my coat pocket. The wind pressed against my face, carrying the sounds of muffled laughter and clinking glasses from inside. I let it wash over me. It wasn't that they couldn't see me. It was that they chose not to. That's when it hit me. Their silence wasn't ignorance. It was permission. Permission to keep things the way they liked them. Delphine shining in the spotlight. Me, holding it steady from behind. I turned back toward the clubhouse and walked in. Past the bar. Through the hallway. Back to the dining room. I sat down in the same seat with no name. I smiled when someone made a joke. I nodded when someone passed me a plate. But I wasn't there anymore. The buzz around dessert had started. Someone rolled in a cart of pies, apple, pumpkin, pecan, while others hovered near the coffee station, balancing plates and small talk. I stood to stretch, thinking I'd head to the restroom, but a small crowd forming in the hallway caught my eye. A display had been set up near the coat closet, tucked neatly against the back wall. Strings of fairy lights framed a wide corkboard, covered in glossy photos. A handwritten sign above it read, "Our family through the years." I drifted toward it, unnoticed. They were all gathered around, pointing and laughing at snapshots, their backs turned to me. I waited until the space cleared, then stepped closer. There was Ruth Ann in her garden, holding a baby Lyra. Chase, from 2 summers ago, grilling in the backyard like he'd always been part of the family. Delphine at her graduation, again at her fellowship award dinner, and once more at her book signing. I scanned each row. Thanksgiving 2019, Mom's 65th, Lyra's 8th grade science fair, her high school awards banquet. I was there for all of them. I remembered standing behind the camera, asking people to scoot in, reminding them to smile. I remembered holding Ruth Ann's purse while she took pictures with friends. I remembered being the one who bought the banner, the flowers, the catering, but I wasn't in any of them, not one. I stood in front of that wall for nearly 5 minutes. No one noticed. Or maybe they did and just assumed I was admiring it like everyone else. A voice behind me said, "That trip to Michigan was such a blast, wasn't it?" I turned to see a woman I didn't recognize, holding a glass of wine and smiling. I nodded, then pointed to the corner of the collage. "I'm not in that one." She tilted her head. "Really? I thought everyone was there." "Not quite everyone," I said, then stepped away before she could respond. Back at the table, Lyra had just unwrapped the laptop. I'd slipped it under her chair earlier that evening, tied with a silver ribbon and a note she never opened. Ruth Ann clapped softly. "Oh, wow, that's fancy. Did you get this for her, Delphine?" Delphine chuckled. "No, it's from Maribel," she said, raising her voice just enough for the table to hear. "She's always trying to convert everyone into tech people. You know how she is." Lyra looked up briefly, smiled in my direction, and muttered a "thanks" before returning to whatever was on her phone screen. The box sat in front of her, unopened. I took a sip of my lukewarm coffee. It tasted flat. Bitter, like it had been sitting out too long. Kind of like me. There's a certain numbness that sets in after enough small cuts. You don't flinch anymore. You just note it and tuck it away. Quietly. Precisely. My thoughts drifted, back to when Lyra was 3. Delphine had been accepted into a teaching residency on the East Coast and needed someone to take care of her daughter. I moved into their house for 6 months, balancing my job and Lyra's preschool drop-offs. I remembered teaching her to double-click with the mouse, making pancakes shaped like stars and elephants, reading the same picture book 4 nights in a row because she liked the way I made the cat's voice sound. Those memories weren't in frames on the wall. They didn't even exist in stories anymore. As far as everyone else was concerned, I hadn't been there at all. If you're not in the picture, I thought, eventually people forget you were even in the room. I stood near the buffet table, pretending to look at the pies. Around me, people laughed and shared stories. No one asked where I'd gone. No one asked how I was doing. And that was the part that landed hardest. Not that they didn't remember, but that they didn't think to. Before I returned to my seat, I glanced one last time at the photo wall. A small white card had been pinned in the lower corner, hand-lettered in Delphine's loopy script. "Family is who shows up." I exhaled through my nose. Not quite a laugh, more like something between disbelief and detachment. I showed up, I whispered to myself, every damn time. But I didn't take the card down. I didn't move a single photo. I didn't make a scene. I walked back to my nameless chair, sat down, and folded my hands neatly in my lap. Dessert had already begun. I was no longer hungry. I stayed at the table long enough to be polite, or at least to appear that way. I listened to Ruth Ann ask Chase about his woodworking hobby and nodded along when Lyra talked about a new school club she was technically co-leading. I stirred my coffee 3 times and never took a sip. Eventually, the hum of voices faded behind me as I slipped into the kitchen. Dishes were already stacked beside the sink, half scraped, waiting. I didn't ask permission. I grabbed a towel and started clearing plates. Delphine appeared a few moments later, standing at the counter across from me. She didn't look surprised to see me working. "That's sweet of you," she said, tossing her hair over one shoulder. "But we've got it covered." She said it like a kindness, but it wasn't one. It was dismissal wrapped in civility. She turned to Julian, who was pouring himself another glass of wine nearby. "Maribel's always happiest when she has a little task, keeps her grounded." He laughed, polite, uncertain. I didn't. I kept rinsing the plate in my hand and dried it slower than necessary. My fingers moved automatically, but my thoughts were somewhere else. Farther now, sharper. I left the kitchen without saying a word. Back in the dining room, people had started shifting chairs to make room for the kids. Lyra squeezed in next to her cousin, bumping elbows with a bit too much energy. Napkins were dropped. Someone made a comment about sugar highs. Delphine's voice cut across the room like a practiced joke. "Kids shouldn't take up space." Laughter. Chase let out one of his loud, obnoxious laughs. Ruth Ann chuckled behind her wineglass. A few cousins snorted. It passed quickly, just another throwaway line in a night full of them. But I saw where their eyes landed. They weren't looking at the kids. They were looking at me. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't even veiled. Delphine said it with just enough of a smile to feign innocence and just enough bite to make her meaning crystal clear. I didn't flinch. I didn't defend myself. I reached for my water glass. My fingers were steady this time. I sipped slowly and set it down without a sound. "Come on," Ruth Ann said from 2 seats down. "You know she's just teasing." I didn't respond. I didn't even glance her way. Teasing implies affection. That was not what that was. I looked across the table at Delphine. She avoided my gaze. That's how I knew she meant it. There's a certain kind of smile I've learned to wear. Not the one that invites conversation, or calms tension, or smooths over other people's mistakes. No. This one is different. This one says, "I see exactly what you're doing, and I'm not giving you the satisfaction of reacting." It's the smile I wore then. I folded my napkin with care, creased it neatly in half, then in half again. I pressed it down beside my plate and leaned back in my chair. People continued talking, the joke already forgotten. But not by me, because something shifted inside me in that moment. Not loudly, not dramatically, just decisively. You spend enough time pretending words don't sting, and one day you realize it's not because you've grown stronger. It's because you've gone numb. But I wasn't numb anymore. I was awake. And I was taking notes. Every time Delphine corrected my tone. Every time she turned a compliment into a dig. Every time she smiled while sweeping me aside. I had tolerated it all under the label of keeping the peace. But peace doesn't look like being erased. It looks like being respected. I didn't get up. I didn't excuse myself. I didn't throw a fit. But mentally, I had started packing. I had begun the quiet exit they wouldn't even notice. Until it was over. The conversation shifted to travel plans for Christmas. I heard someone say something about flights being outrageous. Someone else groaned about Airbnb prices in Vermont. I tuned it out. I was done thinking about shared holiday rentals. Done pretending we were building anything together. There was nothing left to build. Not for me. The room carried on without me, and I let it. I sat still while the noise swirled, forks clinking against dessert plates, someone debating whipped cream versus ice cream, Ruth Ann telling Chase she was just so proud of how he stepped in for the turkey prep. No one noticed I hadn't touched my pie. No one asked why. Delphine tapped her spoon against her glass again, this time for something more organized. "Let's go around the table," she announced, standing just enough to assert control. "Say something you're proud of this year. Something you're grateful for." I braced myself. The first few were harmless. A cousin bought a house. Another finally passed the bar. Chase, of course, said something vague about finding stability. Ruth Ann beamed like she was officiating the moment. Then came Delphine's turn. "I'm proud to be entering the final year of my doctorate," she said, pausing like a well-rehearsed keynote speaker. "Grateful for the support that's carried me, our incredible mother, my strong daughter, and the friends who've reminded me of who I am." She glanced toward me, the way you'd glance at a light switch, acknowledging it exists, not appreciating it. "And of course, my sister Maribel," she continued, raising her glass slightly in my direction. "The tech genius of the family. Great salary, little soul, but she shows up." A few chuckles broke the stillness. I didn't smile, not genuinely, but I tilted my head, just enough for them to think I took it well. A party trick I've perfected over the years. Little soul. That one landed in a place I thought had already hardened. I glanced down at my place setting, the wine glass I didn't want, the pie I didn't eat, the name card that still had my ex-husband's last name on it. It was like every detail tonight had been curated to remind me I was welcome, but not quite seen. The conversation moved on. I didn't. 10 minutes later, as the group rose to refill drinks and stretch their legs, a family friend, Uncle Paul, who shows up to everything and contributes to nothing, hovered beside my chair. Delphine leaned in. "Would you mind swapping with Paul? He's more central to the family line." That's how she phrased it. Central. I blinked. My eyes fell on the chair beneath me. The same one I'd quietly added from the stack in the corner, because mine hadn't been placed. I remembered signing the catering check, the wine order, the venue deposit. I paid for the seat. I paid for the table. And yet here I was, being asked to move, for someone more central. I stood slowly. "Of course," I said, stepping back. But then I turned. "You know what? Keep the chair. And the story. I've held both long enough." The words landed like cold water on a warm table. Conversations stalled mid-sentence. Ruth Ann cleared her throat. Uncle Paul looked confused. Delphine said nothing. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair and folded it over my arm. I wasn't leaving, not yet, but I wasn't staying in that spot either. "I'm good standing," I said, my voice steady. "Honestly, this room feels a little too crowded anyway." No one laughed. No one followed up. That silence? It was confirmation. I walked over to the hallway and leaned against the wall near the restroom. Not hiding, just breathing. Giving myself space no one else seemed willing to grant. In the mirror above the sink, I saw a version of me that was no longer waiting. My reflection didn't look angry. Just finished. I washed my hands slowly, not because they were dirty, but because I needed something to do while everything around me shifted. The kind of shift that happens inside, where no one can see it. The one that matters most. I dried my hands and smoothed the front of my shirt. Then I looked myself in the eye and smiled. Not politely, not defensively, just honestly. I didn't return to the table right away. I stood near the coat rack and listened as someone asked about dessert seconds. Ruth Ann laughed a little too loud. Delphine filled the space with ease. She always did. They didn't miss me. That wasn't new. What was new was that I didn't mind. I used to think strength was staying silent to keep the peace. Now I knew better. Real strength is speaking in a way that doesn't need to raise its voice. After I left the coat rack, I didn't return to the table. I lingered by the hallway just long enough for no one to wonder where I'd gone. Then I stepped outside, wrapped my coat tight, and walked the 2 blocks to where I parked. I didn't say goodbye. The drive home was quiet. No music, just the steady rhythm of tires over wet pavement and the low hum of the heater. My phone sat face down on the passenger seat, silent. It stayed that way the whole ride. When I got back to my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and sat in the dark for a while. The room felt different. Not empty, just unburdened, like I had finally set something down that I'd been carrying for far too long. I changed into a sweatshirt, tied my hair up, and opened my laptop. The screen glowed cool and pale in the dim light. My fingers moved without hesitation. I logged into the scholarship platform. Delphine's name appeared in the list of active recipients. Right below it, mine, listed as primary sponsor. 2 clicks brought up the option, remove funding. The cursor blinked, waiting. A pop-up asked for the reason. I typed change in personal boundaries. No anger, no paragraph, no explanation, just truth. I clicked submit. There was no dramatic music, no cinematic tension, but I felt it. A shift in the room. Not loud, just complete. I closed the laptop, pushed it aside, and poured myself a glass of water. As I walked to the window, my phone buzzed. I flipped it over. A text from an old coworker. Didn't you give your niece a MacBook for Thanksgiving? Just saw this on Facebook Marketplace. Attached was a screenshot. There it was. Lyra's name. A photo of the laptop still in the box. Same ribbon I'd tied, still perfectly knotted. The listing read, brand new, never used, still in original packaging. I didn't feel heat rise in my chest. I didn't gasp or clench my jaw. I just stared at the image, then locked the phone. Of course it's unused, I said aloud, to no one. Because of course it was. They never unwrap what doesn't fit their story. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the email draft I'd saved months ago. One I wrote during one of Delphine's late-night complaints about money, long before she knew I was quietly covering her tuition. The subject line read, termination of private sponsorship. I skimmed through the message, fine-tuning a few words. I attached the original funding documents, all signed by me, with clear language about the right to withdraw at any time. They never asked where the money came from. They never once said thank you. Now they'd learn what happens when I stopped. I hit send. The email went to the university, not to Delphine, not to Ruth Ann. No drama, no confrontation, just the right people, the people who matter when dollars move. I closed my laptop and leaned back. For the first time in months, my shoulders didn't feel tight. I took my glass of water and stood at the window. The sky had darkened, but the streetlight outside cast a soft orange glow across the empty sidewalk. It was quiet. No missed calls. No follow-up texts. Not even a half-hearted group message from the family chat. They won't notice I'm gone, I said softly. Not until something breaks that they assumed would always just work. I drank slowly, watching the condensation slide down the glass. I didn't feel victorious, not vindicated, just clean. This wasn't revenge. This was realignment. I thought about the years I'd spent thinking my role was to hold the scaffolding, supporting everyone else's spotlight from behind. The emotional labor, the financial patchwork, the silence. They called it family. I called it imbalance. And now I was calling it off. The next morning, I made coffee just the way I liked it, quiet, strong, and without explaining anything to anyone. The silence in my apartment felt earned now, not lonely. I opened the windows to let the air in, not to chase ghosts out. Around 2 p.m., I logged into my email and sorted through the clutter. A familiar subject line caught my eye. Subject: funding support for academic program terminated. Action required. It had been forwarded to me automatically as the sponsor on record. Attached to it was a copy of the notification sent to Delphine. I read through it without flinching. She would have opened that email somewhere between her second espresso and third superiority complex. And right below the heading, she would have seen my name, Maribel Ramos. Sponsor. Contributor. Author of every payment she'd never acknowledged. At the very bottom, just beneath the university's policy language and legalese, was my final note. This financial arrangement has ended due to a violation of personal trust. I imagined her reading it. I didn't need to see her face to know what it looked like. Confusion first, then disbelief, then fury. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Delphine. You need to fix this. Now! I set the phone down without replying. 2 minutes later. After everything I've done, you're going to humiliate me over a joke? I let it sit. A third message, longer this time. You think this makes you stronger? This makes you pathetic. Petty. You're cutting your own blood over what? Because I didn't clap loud enough for your good little tech job? I didn't answer that one either. What was there to say that hadn't already been erased or twisted into something convenient for her to believe? Later that night, I walked to the cabinet where I kept important documents, tax forms, contracts, power of attorney letters, and pulled out the red folder I hadn't opened since spring. Inside was the signed deed transfer, the one I signed 2 years ago when Delphine stood in my kitchen and said, "You make more than me. It only makes sense you hold the title. Legally. I'll manage things emotionally." She'd said it like she was doing me a favor, like her emotional labor made up for the taxes, the maintenance, the silent weight of being the responsible one. I'd believed her back then. Now I knew better. I slid the deed back into its sleeve and tucked it into a new envelope. On the front, I wrote in black ink, "In case she ever tries again." Not out of spite, not even as leverage, just as proof, so I'd never again second-guess what was real. I didn't text her back. Instead, I messaged Lyra. "Hey, hope school's going well. You're smart. Remember that doesn't come from a degree. Call if you need anything outside of tuition." She didn't reply that night, or the next day, but I wasn't waiting. That era was over. The next evening, I cleaned out my inbox. I unsubscribed from newsletters I never read, deleted old threads with urgent in the subject line that turned out to be anything but. I removed myself from the shared family calendar. Click, click, done. This wasn't rebellion. This was recalibration. I'd spent years thinking silence meant maturity, that swallowing discomfort was noble, that being the reliable one meant keeping everyone else from ever noticing the cracks. But cracks spread. Eventually, they become breaks, and I was no longer going to be the glue. The following morning, I got a voicemail from Ruth Ann. Her voice had that usual flatness she used when she didn't want to pick sides, but still wanted to sound like she was trying. "Delphine's upset. I told her you didn't mean to hurt her. Can we all just move past this?" Move past what? The years of quiet labor? The money I gave without a thank you? The way my absence went unnoticed until it cost them something? I replayed the message once, then again, then deleted it. There was no anger left in me, just a quiet, steady sense of release. The apartment had settled into its usual late evening hush, the kind of silence I used to fill with podcasts or television reruns, anything to keep from hearing my own thoughts. But now I let it sit. I even welcomed it. I was wiping down the kitchen counters when my phone buzzed from the living room. I didn't rush to it. When I picked it up, the lock screen lit up with one name I hadn't expected. Lyra. Her message was short. "Mom's been crying. She said you cut her off for no reason. Why did you do it? I don't get it." I stood still for a moment, phone in hand, heart not racing, but not still either. It wasn't accusation. It wasn't sarcasm. Just a question, raw, unfiltered, honest. I read it again, and a third time. My thumb hovered over the reply icon, but I didn't tap it. I sat down at the dining table with the phone in front of me. My old journal sat nearby, still open from the night before, pages slightly curled at the corners. I stared at the message again, not because I didn't know what to say, because I knew too well. I started typing. "Ask your mother who kept your lights on when she went back to school. Ask who helped you write your first scholarship essay. Ask who—" Then I stopped. Not because it wasn't true. It was. All of it. Every bit. But it wasn't her responsibility to carry. Not the debt, not the silence, not the explanations her mother refused to give. I erased the draft. I took a breath, deeper than necessary, then reopened the message window and typed, "Ask her who paid for your education, and why she never told you." No punctuation, no emoji, no need. I hit send and turned the phone face down. The screen dimmed to black. I left it that way, because sometimes the answer isn't more words, it's fewer. I walked into the kitchen, filled the kettle, and waited for the whistle. The water boiled slow, steady, unbothered. I chose my favorite mug, one with a chip near the lip that I'd stopped noticing years ago, and poured. At my desk, I opened my journal to a fresh page and wrote, "I didn't disappear, I withdrew. The difference is, one feels like loss, the other feels like choice." I underlined the last sentence once, not for emphasis, for closure. The truth was, I had disappeared before. Gradually, quietly, trying not to offend, trying not to shake the fragile illusion of family harmony that rested so heavily on my back. But this was intentional. This was clarity. As the tea cooled, I flipped back through older entries, some written in frustration, others in desperation, many from years I barely remembered clearly. I studied the handwriting, sharper in my 20s, loopier in my 30s, more controlled now. I paused on a page I had written the week Delphine got her fellowship. If I keep giving, they'll eventually see me as more than the one who fixes things. I closed the journal. The person who wrote that didn't understand yet that being useful and being valued aren't the same thing. Now I did. There was no message from Lyra after that, and I didn't expect one. She would ask, Delphine would spin, maybe she'd cry, maybe she'd deflect. Maybe she'd say, "Your aunt's always had issues with attention." But I'd said what needed to be said. No yelling, no dragging history into daylight. Just one sentence. I moved around the apartment with a calm that didn't need to be earned. I lit a candle in the hallway, just because I liked the way it flickered against the framed picture of the lake from my last solo trip. I folded laundry. I ran the dishwasher. I existed. For me. Not for the phone. Not for the family group chat. Not for people who only noticed absence when it cost them something. When I finally walked past the phone again, I didn't check it. I didn't wonder if she replied. That was the quiet shift I never saw coming. I no longer needed to be pulled back in. The next morning, the sky outside my window was a pale wash of gray, like even the weather was unsure how it felt. I made breakfast without thinking. Scrambled eggs, toast, half a grapefruit. I didn't finish any of it. The voicemail from Ruth Ann had already set the tone for the day. She'd said it like she was breaking up a playground squabble, like there was no real damage, no bruises, no years of erosion masked as civility. "Your sister's hurting. She didn't mean what she said. Can't we just move past this?" I didn't feel the need to correct her anymore. It was a reflex I'd spent years sharpening, and I was done dulling myself on people who'd never listen. After rinsing the plate, I walked to the hall closet. I hadn't touched that box in months. Labeled Chicago Winter, it held the pieces of me that only came out for family occasions. The coat I wore to Ruth Ann's birthday, the gloves I'd bought for that Thanksgiving 4 years ago, and the sweater I almost wore last week. Cranberry wool, hand-stitched collar. I'd picked it because it made me feel like myself. Confident, a little bold, a little bright. But 3 nights before the gathering, Delphine had texted me, "Let's keep it low-key. Nothing too flashy. Don't want anyone feeling out of place." So I wore something beige, safe, forgettable. I held the sweater up to the light, running my fingers along the stitching. It still smelled faintly of lavender dryer sheets, and I felt nothing. No sting, no ache. Just the final exhale of someone who knows they'll never wear that version of themselves again. I folded it carefully and laid it inside a donation bag near the front door. Not out of bitterness, but because I no longer had room in my life for symbols of restraint. I'd outgrown the version of me who waited for permission to be visible. Back at my desk, I opened my laptop. The family group chat still sat muted in the corner of the messaging app. I scrolled back, not because I wanted to rehash anything, but because I needed to see it clearly one last time. There it was, the Thanksgiving invitation. Valdez, printed neatly next to my name. My ex-husband's last name, the one I hadn't used in nearly 7 years. I never corrected it. I kept thinking, next time I'll say something, but next time always became another missed chance to stand up for myself. I didn't bother fixing it now. Instead, I deleted the entire thread. Not as a dramatic gesture, not even as closure, but because I was done holding space for versions of me that made other people comfortable. They could keep the story they needed to tell themselves. I was no longer playing the supporting role. Later that afternoon, I sat down with my journal and wrote a new entry at the top of a fresh page. This time next year, I'll be at a different table. Maybe just mine. No toast, no performance, just peace. I let the pen linger at the end, then signed my name with a slow, steady hand. My full name. No modifiers. No borrowed titles. Next to the journal, I placed a flyer I'd picked up weeks ago and hadn't been ready to deal with. It was from a nonprofit that supported scholarships for women in tech, especially first-gen college students, older returners, and those who never fit the mold. I donated quietly, anonymously at first. But now I wrote a check. And at the bottom, I requested it be designated under a new sub-fund, the Maribel Initiative, for women in tech who were never picked first. I didn't add a dedication, not in memory of, not in honor of, because this wasn't about remembering someone who'd been lost. It was about becoming someone who'd finally been found. The checkbook closed with a soft thud. I tucked everything into an envelope and slid it into my purse, ready to drop off at the post office the next morning. The wind had picked up outside, rattling the window panes. I moved through the apartment, drawing the curtains and turning on the hallway light. The candle I lit the night before had burned itself out, leaving only wax and the faint scent of cedar. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the pull to check my phone. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't hoping for recognition. I wasn't rewriting the story to make anyone feel better about how it ended. I just closed the door, boiled the kettle, and sat down at my table. The table that finally belonged to me. Before I go, I want to say this to anyone listening who's ever felt like the silent one in the family. The one who gave without being seen, who kept the peace while quietly falling apart, who thought being helpful was the same as being loved. You're not alone. It took me too long to learn that stepping back isn't the same as giving up. That sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop showing up where your presence is only valued for what you offer, not for who you are. We don't always get closure from the people who hurt us, but we can choose to close the chapter ourselves, not with bitterness, but with dignity. If this story made you think of someone in your life, maybe it reminded you of yourself, take a moment and ask, what part of your story are you still writing just to keep others comfortable? And what would it look like to write it for you finally? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story touched something inside you, leave a 1 in the comments, or let me know where you're watching from. And if it challenged you, if it made you uncomfortable, tell me why. I welcome all voices here. And don't forget, if you want more stories like this, grounded in truth, heart, and healing, please subscribe to the channel. We've got more coming. Real stories, hard lessons, quiet victories. And maybe one of them will be yours.